welcome to Revive Ministries Podcast. This is June, and this month we're discussing and we've been having guests on about post traumatic stress disorder awareness month. Um, like I've had two of my guests earlier this month mention that 12 million people in the United States are living with PTSD. Most don't get help. And a lot of the themes that we were talking about was this measuring of how bad someone's experience is versus others can actually act as a barrier towards actually getting help. So, like a lot of things in the calendar, each month I come up with a theme. I think about what is relevant, and when it comes to paying tribute, it's being honest of what's going on. A lot of times when it comes to PTSD, it's never really mentioned. It's never really discussed a lot of times because someone else has it worse than I do. My problems are not that important. Um, and I think that in its essence kind of captures this silent that sometimes healing is a hope. There's a lot of shame, there's a lot of context, a lot of cultural context when it comes to trauma. And we're paying tribute to those healing and those suffering from trauma today. And also just reminding that there is help out there. Disclaimer, if you are in the United States, the 988 is the suicide crisis lifeline. Um, I've used the same quote. So today it's just going to be me. Scheduling issues has sometimes, doesn't it makes it harder to kind of get our schedules aligned. But again, I do feel that this topic is important that needs to be discussed each week to remind us as we move forward. It's June, and a lot of times I say, especially in the beginning, whether there's a guest with me or not, people have said it better than I. This person, I don't know who said this, but I feel it kind of encapsulate the discussion that I've been having with some of my guests this month. It's not about what's wrong with you; it's about what happened to you. Um, Sometimes when things are very fresh, when things are hard for those who are struggling with trauma, it's hard to unpack. Um, there's a lot of attachment to the value or the view of the individual themselves, whether they're a victim, whether it was their fault or not. And I think last week, one or um, mentioned trauma may seem small on the outside, may seem that for another person it's not quote unquote trauma, but it really is. It is from the individual who is experiencing it that can actually say that this has impacted them in this way. Obviously, being going through a life event can not always can produce some some uh, some issues later on if not addressed. Um, I mentioned that traumas can come in many forms, but a lot of times, um, right now, it's really about understanding, individualizing the person's experience and getting them the help. Remember in the beginning, 12 million people in the United States are living with PTSD, and most of them don't get the help they need. The question is not, the question really should be why? Why is this? Um, a lot of times when we think about trauma or PTSD, post traumatic stress disorder, we think about our veterans. There's a quote from Jack Wood. He says, I feel no emotional connection to these outwardly human gestures. I'm not there because I never left Afghanistan. I remember in our discussions with my guests, I You can insert pretty much anything in this context, and I love how this quote is structured because it really kind of encapsulates at least um, of what it may feel like. I feel no emotional connection to these outwardly human gestures. I'm not there because I never left whatever traumatic event that person is experiencing. And for a lot of people, 1980 is when post-traumatic stress was actually included in the diagnostic DSM-V, which for the longest time it was called shell shock. A lot of times this was not talked about. A lot of times, you pick yourself from the bootstraps. But as we know, as we learn more about how stress can affect the body, how traumas, if not addressed, if things are can be problematic, not only to your connections, to your families, but also to your health. I remember asking some of my guests, what have you experienced or seen that helped those suffering, and what has not been helpful? Well, generally, I'm not a therapist. I work in the mental health field, but what I've seen help was actually asking for help. It sounds kind of counter. This sounds anticlimactic, but um, even even recognizing that you have an issue, that it is something that you want to address, not looking to, well, how's this going to look? I don't want to be a burden, but actually getting to the point that wanting to get help. I seen that help. I seen a supportive family that doesn't brush them off. Oh, this is not a big deal. You should be over this. Those who experience grief understand that it takes the time. It takes the time it does. Whatever. Obviously, I do encourage those seeking who are struggling to seek help. At the end of the day, I think an interesting kind of illustration is, and it may have nothing to do with trauma, but just in in perception. Um, some a family member, and this is just an illustration. No one I know, just from collected from my experience working in the field and my own experience. Um, Family members are all rallying around. This person just needs to be independent. Oh, that's great, independent. Let's get him a place so he will feel more independent. That individual sometimes, not all times, may not want to get an old place. Maybe that's not the number one priority for that individual. Maybe going to a new place by himself or by herself sounds heavy because the only thing that's going to make that person feel is that I'm just going to feel miserable somewhere else. Well, um, on the outside, looking at tangible, yeah, you have a roof over your head. We're giving you all this stuff, but when the person, at least from my own experience, from um, the idea of being, it may actually appear that the person is being pushed away. But I guess a lot of times being working in the mental health field, I'm thinking about what is independence for this individual. A lot of times we think about the more client-centered approach. So what I find is when the individual himself who is suffering is involved in whatever treatment, whether it's trauma, in this context it is, it usually does, but when it's personalized to that individual, not the expectation to others, I do find it does work out to be better. I never read this book, but I was reading through some comments, some snippets of notable quotes during for PTSD month, and this one stood out. It's from a book. Um, it's from Corey Ten Boom and John and Elizabeth Sherrill, from The Hidden Place: The Triumph true story of Corey Ten Boom. And the excerpt from the book says the man's face and body told the story more eloquently than his words. Pain haunted eyes, shaking hands that Ked could not forget. I feel like, as many of us know, those who are, a lot of times we can't find the words, at least what we're feeling. Sometimes a miracle to even describe or communicate in any effective way. And how is that different when someone's experiencing? And I feel this excerpt really kind of shows how sometimes we look at through our own lens when we're trying to help someone, or sometimes we just look at the tangible. But a lot of times, the hardest battles are fought from within. I've said this before, and the hardest three words to say a lot of times is, I need help. It's another quote that kind of piggybacks. It says, the mind replays what the heart can't delete. Um, there's there's a lot of different kind of therapies out there, a lot of different trauma. I am not going to say one side or another. I would just say, if it was cancer, you would get a second opinion. If it doesn't work, you would continue to try to find something that would. Um, Sometimes if we're measuring, if we kind of look at the context of cancer, if I had cancer or someone I loved had cancer, and we looked, oh, but my cancer is not as bad as the other person's cancer, then I'm not going to get help. I know it sounds really kind of doesn't make sense, but I would say when we treat post traumatic stress, when we treat mental illness, when we treat these internal battles, these things that people struggle with, that we may not see on the outside. There may be indications, like at least in the book, that there may be subtle indications, but beyond that, when we treat mental health trauma as equal to our medical health, um, I feel our response and how we go about it, and that's something that I feel um, may be helpful for those who are struggling. Um, I know some people are introverts and some people are extroverts. It's not being public. It's being knowing that this stuff takes time to get where one needs to be. And the question is, does that person feel that he's deserving of that time? Sometimes when I think of the theme that I made, the silent healing, maybe something that the person struggling would like to feel is happening. Sometimes it's sometimes it's a hope, a silent healing, but sometimes, unfortunately, especially when things get hard, sometimes we cannot stay silent. And I guess this month sometimes shows us that, yes, understandably, these this idea of trauma is hard for many people to share. At least I hope that those who are struggling have someone to share with, even if it's silently. So when just as I mentioned just now, a silent healing could be looked at two ways. That the person, though, unfortunately, despite what pressures, what expectations The person is intentional to get the help. Though silently, he or she is getting the help. Or it may be a reminder why we have these awareness months that the person's wishing that or hoping that their healing will become silent so so they won't feel like a burden. There's so many ways to kind of look at this. A silent healing kind of describes somehow how when we think about trauma, um, when you have a group of people just sharing how hard they're or what they've been through, um, there is this fear that the person's struggles are not valued or important enough to get the help. Um, it may be suggested that that only through silence can you get healing through trauma, because unfortunately, as human beings, we love to compare. Well, I my life is not as bad as his or hers, so yeah, I'm okay. But you're okay for who? Are you okay for people you want to be um, accepted or belong to? Are you really okay for you? Is it better to kind of feel well, is it better to seem okay or actually be okay? I think you could flip the word a silent healing in so many different ways. Some positive and some actually reflective of why we even have these awareness months. I wish that a lot of these awareness months are not something that we need to keep silent. I sometimes wonder if we could remember in a way and be respectful. Would the person who initially thought that their problem was not good enough get the help that they need? Silent healing, how we look at our lives day to day, um, has more influence on how we see ourselves, whether we like to believe it or not. Um, so I asked my people, the guests who came on this month, how would they like the PTSD Awareness Month to be remembered this year? In short, that whatever struggles you are going through, whatever trauma, whatever experience, life event that you experience, if it is still troubling you, ask for help. Whether it is trauma itself or just a life event that you're adjusting through, the title means little as long as you know and you feel that you don't have to be silent in your healing. Silence also, I like people to remember this year when it comes to PTSD month, to understand that people have the right and may feel more comfortable being private, just like they would with other illnesses. So I would say it's not one size fits all. Whatever works, whatever is helpful, whatever is healing for you. Maybe it is a little bit silent. Maybe part of your family doesn't really accept, but that part of the family is not experiencing or having the issues that you're having internally daily. Now, setting boundaries, deciding what's important. And I think, all in all, I hope with PTSD Awareness Month is that we get past the measuring stick of how bad someone's trauma is and just get the help that someone needs, whether um, whether it is something that is just adjustment or some big life event that you experience, or something more. Maybe something that you didn't even realize that was building up for years and years. Whatever it is, it's not a contest. I like this year to be remembered as a day that we don't have to be silent when we want to be, when we need healing. The day that we can respect those who do choose to be silent and their privacy be secured. Families and cultures are messy. People will accept or not accept. I do hope, and I remember saying this in various months, accountability is not a bad word when we're creating safe places around us. I'm not saying there's never a quick fix with this stuff, but the first step, I feel, just like I said earlier, was recognizing that there is an issue. And eventually knowing that you can ask for help. Um, there have been, I know there's a lot of people more qualified, people who've worked with people and directly therapists in regards to the modalities of how some trauma therapies work versus others. And I really appreciate that there's options for you. I encourage those who are listening to find what option works for you. I never like reinventing the wheel. So when it comes to PTSD month, it's really not about what worked for your neighbor or what worked for your family member. It's what works for you. And why is it important? And it will take the time it takes. This month is right after, last month was remembering our names. Remember our names. I just I think when we personalize these months and understand that, I can I can't I can't uproot my culture, my life, where I was brought up and generalize the diagnosis to a shell of who I am. I do encourage you to find what is helpful, what is safe, not all things that are done in culture helpful, but also understand, I would say, understand that no can be a complete, well, not can, no is a complete sentence. So find support, find more resources. Like I said in the beginning, 988 is a suicide crisis lifeline in the States. Whatever part of the world you're in, I do encourage you to find what works. If church makes you cringe, if you were assaulted uh, in or you had a bad experience in church, I'm not going to say no. The thing you need to do is go to church. Maybe, but what I would say is what did work. A lot of it may not be a place. It may be a question. A question of what is what is healing for me? What is healing for me today? What's important for me today? And do encourage those to find what it is. Get help. Ask those three words. Adjust. It won't be static. It will change constantly. You may feel you figured it out, but then you may have to shift, adjust. But all I'm saying is what that can be related to anything. Remember the illustration I said before. If I had a certain type of cancer, but it wasn't as bad as someone else's cancer, would I say, okay, guess I'm not going to go because that person's cancer is worse than mine? I know it sounds ridiculous, but please treat your health, mental health, your trauma the same way. If it is something that is bothering you, it's important because it's you. So I do encourage those who are listening to remember that. Remember that you yourself is an individual, not the diagnosis itself, that you have a context that is unique, and that what may help you may not help your neighbor, your friend, but find what does help. And my final thought is take time and reflect. If it is something that's bothering you, the first thing I would encourage anyone listening is to ask for help. It's not going to be one time you ask for help. It may not be fixed in a month, years, but it's that step by step, and you'll get a second opinion. Find what works, find what doesn't work. Surround yourself with people that may be positive, be able to learn to be more effective in communicating. Just because things are not going well for you today doesn't mean that you're always statically a burden. People usually, at least, equate these things as being an attachment to their value. Just like someone who receives news that they're have an illness, it is going to be adjustment. But I want to encourage those and those listening, those watching, those around the world experiencing trauma, those people who are living with those experiencing trauma, people coming back from the war with trauma to get help. Don't worry about who has it worse. Try to find those little steps, whatever it may be. Maybe just talk to someone. Maybe talk to a friend. Even if it's just to get out of the bed today. Maybe it's just saying I'll be willing to think about. Write down what the pros and cons may be. Find out what may be helpful. Ask yourself, what is helpful? Do you want to be better? Do you want it to stop hurting? What would that look like? And all these questions will take time and will change. Get professional help if you're struggling. Call your resource line, find what mental health or therapist, connect with some of the guests that I spoke to. If you feel that what they were presenting was appealing, get a second opinion, see what worked, remember what didn't work. And I just want to say, that a lot of times when I think about this month is not it's not because I have the answers. It's more about it's more about remembering that lot of the answers are start with the questions you ask yourself. So um, give yourself grace. It will take time, and ask those three words if you really need. Um, I need help. I want to thank you for listening, those who have been watching or listening to the channel for quite some time. If you know anyone who wants to be on the podcast, who wants to be a guest, uh, tell them to email me, info at reviveministriesfl.com. That'll be in the notes. Again, I just want to say I appreciate each one of my guests. Unfortunately, today I wasn't able to secure a guest for this week. However, I feel that this topic, like every topic I speak about, I feel each week, because we're so bad at remembering, it's important to continue to move it forward. So, thank you for listening. I want to and joining me in this discussion. Reminder of what we've talked about, this a silent healing tribute to PTSD month. I want to leave you with this, say by saying goodbye for Revive Ministry Podcast. We're in various platforms, reviveministryfl.com. But again, this is goodbye from Revive Ministry Podcast, leaving you with the last quote. It's from Dele Alanubi. It says, "Wounds won't heal the way you want them to. They heal the way they need to."